In 5. Oh, I start. Sorry.
I'm going to leave that in.
All right. Okay. Hey, Dave, what did you think of the Sopranos finale?
I kind of liked it. How about you?
Yeah. So first of all, I have this great, memory of watching it. This was pre-streaming, of course. But it wasn't a TiVo. It was whatever knockoff version of a TiVo we got from our cable company. And we were running like a half hour behind when the show actually aired. So we were watching it through that. And we had a couple of experiences recently at the time of having watched things that we'd recorded that got cut off early. So when they have that last scene and it goes to black, we're both just like, what the I can't believe this goddamn thing did, we're just so angry. And then of course it's like, oh, hold on, but the credits are rolling. So that was that. But yeah, no, like you, I really liked it. I mean, I thought it was just this perfect encapsulation of the whole series, right? He was always this guy who's trying to find these little moments of being a normal person while he's just on this steamroller towards one of two inevitable ends of, violent death or prison. And it doesn't really matter which one it's going to be. It was always going to be one of them. And they just set it up perfectly that it comes to a head that for both. And I loved it. I thought it was great once I realized that I hadn't gotten screwed by my recording device.
Yes, that's something that you and I have on this podcast from time to time. But yes, but I have to ask, why are we talking about this?
We are talking about that finale, Dave, because this is our finale, at least for now. We're certainly open to the concept of a reboot or a reunion show if the cash is right. But this will be the final episode for now of Stupid Gen X Tricks, which I'm going to refer to now as, for one last time, as the podcast for people who used to be cool.
Yes, it's one more step of coolness lost, but at least we can say we went out on a high with a great episode and awesome listeners who we are super grateful to, and also like independently wealthy because of this podcast. Like this thing has made us rich. You now don't you have a chateau?
It's not a chateau, Dave. It's more of a villa.
A villa. Okay. Yes. And yeah. I've got my own drone fleet now. So thank you, listeners. I'm just thrilled about the whole thing. But also, as you have delightfully scripted, we like Lane Kiffin. I mean, we are not like Lane Kiffin. We are leaving before the playoffs, and we will have more to say about that at the end, but we are moving on to other projects, but we're not Lane Kiffin.
Right. Well, to close it out today, we are going to be doing something a little different. Instead of talking about where Gen X came from, we're really going to be talking about where Gen X goes from here. As you know, I'm a little wary of making huge sweeping generalizations about an entire generation, but this is one that I'm 100% certain of, Dave. Ain't none of us getting any younger.
That is true. And in fact, a majority of Gen Xers now have already crossed what some call the Wilfred Brimley line, which is to say that we are older than good old Wilfred was, who was 50 years and 9 months and 6 days old when the movie Cocoon was released. And for those who don't know the movie, it's about a bunch of geezers, right? Isn't that right? So
it is about a bunch of geezers, and he comes across in the movie as the most geezerish. And, you would have guessed that he was in his late 70s probably. And if he was 50 when it was released, he would have been in his 40s still when they made it, right? So
how old is Katharine Hepburn and Henry Fonda in On Golden Pond? Were they like similar ages?
I mean, I think Henry Fonda at least must have been older because he already had the tremors and everything, unless he was acting that, but I don't think he was. I think that was real.
Yeah.
And she she was a big star in the 40s, right?
Oh yeah,
or
yeah.
was it, or even
I
earlier?
mean, she could have had stuff before 1940, but that's definitely the year I'm aware of, or that's the region
Yeah.
I would have named.
So that would put her, let's say she was in her late 20s then. Well, no, that would only put her then in like her late 50s when the movie was made, right? Am I doing the math right?
If that movie was like
Maybe in
83
her
or
60s.
84, yeah.
Oh, I thought it was 70s.
No, that was 80s. Oh, this is
Uh-uh.
it. This could be something, but I feel like she lived to be really old, and so did he. So I bet we're wrong. Let's move
Yeah.
on. Um,
All right.
but I'll stare at my phone when you're yapping on about something, and then I'll come back with delightful updates on this.
All right. I'll just share the anecdote that actually I remember hearing about that movie, my best friend when I was a little kid, which is why I think it was from the 70s actually. Always spent his summers with family in New Hampshire, and he came back one summer and said they were filming this movie on our lake. It's really cool. Which is why I think that it was 70s. But anyway, I have no other notes to make here, but I'm going to ask you another question, Dave, which is what did you think getting other than Henry Fonda and Katharine Hepburn? What did you think getting older looked like when you were a kid?
I mean, I feel like all throughout my life, old was my age plus 10, you know? So when I was four, old was, I mean, old when I was four was probably less than that. It was probably like plus two, right? And
Yeah, I mean he's in third grade.
yeah, exactly. So, but other than that, I think it was whatever my grandparents were because they seemed old.
This is off topic. I saw a funny bit from a comedian the other day with this woman who was talking about her husband being a little bit older than her, that she said that when they got together, she was 25 and he was 34, and she didn't really think anything of it. And then she recently had her 34th birthday and was like, "Oh, you were a creep." But I will say that, I mean, like you, my model of old age when I was a kid was my grandparents, which I guess it is for most people. And, they were, I did the math yesterday, and they were in their 60s for most of my childhood. And they seemed so ancient. I mean, that just seemed like such an advanced age to be. But I also felt, certainly in retrospect, they were an incredible model for, what to aspire for at that age, because they were, my grandfather had retired from day to day work. He was a rabbi actually. I mean, he stepped down from his congregation relatively young, but continued to be on lots of boards and committees and things like that in various places. So he was active, and they had this huge circle of friends, and they traveled a lot and were, lived close to us, so they saw us a lot, and it just seemed like a really, really great life and something I've kind of always aspired to.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Um,
That's cool.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I'm trying to remember how old my grandfather was when he passed, but he worked every day of his life until he couldn't, until he basically had to retire. Then he died like 2 weeks later in a car accident, and so to me, he
Oh
just worked his
God.
whole life.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
but
awful.
well, yeah, it was, but also I sort of I thought this was correct, but I think my dad corrected me on this. I, I feel like there was some theory inside the family that he basically like it wasn't an intentional accident exactly, but that once he couldn't work anymore, he kind of didn't want to go on. He just loved working, and so in some ways it was not an accident. Although anyway, I think it was wrong, but yeah, Grandpa Anderson farmed apples all those years. He was a
All
good guy.
right.
Um,
In Michigan?
yeah, Sparta, Michigan, where my cousin still is a farmer on that same land, and still producing apples. So, although in
All right.
with different techniques. Um, cousin
What
Brett.
different techniques are there for growing apples? That's a different podcast that we don't
Yeah,
have
well,
to
you
get into
you
right now. But yeah.
smaller trees, blue, where apples can grow on them sooner, so they can be planted closer together and produce more density. And then also cross breeding varieties by literally like twisting branches together and doing a cut. It's really interesting.
If we are now just discovering that we should have done many more agricultural science episodes in the course of
and chiropractic as well. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so we're losing the thread as the aging do. Let's see. So there's the thread again. Okay, well, this is the moment where normally we'd be urging people to like and subscribe and do drone shows and whatnot, but I've got my own drone army, and so while we won't discourage you from that, and maybe you're in on, you can get some collectibles from us from our non-existent store we never launched, that could be highly collectible, but I don't know what I'm talking about. But we're going to give you some good advice on getting older, or at least allow our awesome guest to do that. And in the meantime, we can advise you on eating fiber and all that.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and introduce our guest, who is going to make this a much smarter conversation, which is setting a pretty low bar, I think. And that is Ken Stern, the author of this book right here, Healthy to 100, Lessons from the World's Healthiest Countries. Ken is also the chair of the Longevity Project, which fosters public conversation and research on the impact of longer lives on civil society. And he's the host of the award-winning podcast Century Lives from the Stanford Center on Longevity. I wonder what winning an award is like. Prior to all of that, he was the CEO of National Public Radio, and the founder of Palisades Media Ventures. And he's the author of 2 other books, Republican Like Me and With Charity for All. And we will be right back with him after this quick break.
If you could fix oatmeal with no pot and no mess, would you? You can, Right in a bowl, right in the microwave. In 90 seconds. Quaker Oats. It's the right thing to do.
We are back and now joined by Ken Stern. Ken, thank you so much for joining us today. And before we get into all the old guy stuff, we are compelled to start with the question we judge all our guests by, which is, what was the first album you ever bought for yourself?
So I did not expect that question. This is going to be a embarrassing answer because it was
most of them are, Ken, so it's good.
I'm pretty sure dating back to the early 70s or mid 70s, it was an album by Casey and the Sunshine Band. I don't remember the name of the album, but it did have the classic "I'm Your Boogeyman" on it. I'm pretty certain that was album number one.
Also maybe "Get Down Boogie Oogie Oogie."
Of course, I mean, who could forget that?
And we've talked about Casey on the show before, so you're doing just fine so far. And with that out of the way, let's dive into the book and into longevity, and tell us a little bit about how you chose to focus on this topic after some of the other things you've written about and done. And if I'm reading the book correctly, which is never a good assumption, you were kind of inspired by a wedding.
So I'm actually I'll tell you 2 different stories. One of which is, why did I get involved into longevity and healthy aging in the first place? What started with me getting older. So I hit my mid-50s, and all of a sudden the topic of aging, which had never been of interest before, suddenly became of personal interest. And then I met, I actually got, it's often hard to, at least in my life, locate one sort of pivotal moment, but I actually know the moment that I actually really became interested in the topic of longevity, because I met a woman named Laura Carstensen, who's a professor at Stanford and a founder of the Stanford Center on Longevity. And I went to talk with her I thought I was going to talk to her about aging, which, in my mind, I think like most people, like, what do we do with all these old people? And she wanted to talk to me about longevity, which is how do we reinvent the life course so that our longer lives can be healthier, more productive, and healthier. So that's when I really got interested in the topic. I got interested in the topic of social connection. So I can now launch into the second story. I actually got interested in the topic of social connection, which is the topic of the book, in a little town called Presidio, Texas, which is right across the border from Chihuahua, Mexico. I host a podcast, actually for Stanford, called Century Lives. We were doing a season on why some places have longer life expectancy than the underlying data say they should. And Presidio County, Texas, which is a very poor county and one of the 10 longest lived counties in the country, is sort of an exception to the rule. And when we went to Presidio, I think, like most people, I assumed it would be some combination of healthcare or nutrition or exercise that was unusual there. And none of that proved to be true. I mean, there's no American hospital within 70 miles. The food is high in fat, and the principal of the local high school. Oh, fantastic! Yeah, I'd be happy eating it every day for my much shorter life. And the principal of the local high school is considered eccentric because he bikes to work. And the answer turned out to be in Presidio, everywhere we went for that season, was that people there live much more socially connected lives than some of the other areas around it. So in Presidio, it's a story of intergenerational households, parents, grandparents, children, all living together. And if they didn't live together, they lived next door to their cousins or their uncles, their aunts, and everyone was in and out of their houses every day, supporting each other, taking care of each other, providing community. And that was really the story of social connection. And for me, the sort of starter's pistols on, wow, if they're doing great, the rest of us are doing poorly as we get lonelier as we.
I mean, aren't there a lot of towns that fit that profile?
Not really. Not really. So yes and no. I'm going to answer every question, Dave, with yes and no. I say no because over the last 50 years, Americans have gotten lonelier and lonelier, which means they spend less time with friends, family, neighbors, and other peoples and communities. My son, who's 18, spends an hour less a day with friends than I do, or my son's generation.
We'll say that I've never seen anyone. I rarely see anyone bowling alone, even though that seemed to be the metaphor of choice when some of this discussion first reared its head in
it wasn't it wasn't a metaphor. I mean, it is a metaphor now, but it was in fact one of the things that Bob Putnam was trying to find out when he did his sort of seminal work on social capitalism, social capital. He was actually intrigued by the question that people in the United States were bowling more, but league membership had declined. And that it's the notion that in fact people were still bowling, but they were bowling by themselves. And that's true. And one thing he found out was everything that brought people together, churches, unions, political organizations, sewing circles, Elks Clubs, all have been in decline. When he wrote that book in 2000, and it's even truer today than it was 25 years ago. So Presidio is the exception in terms of how much time we spend with each other. It's not the exception, though. One of the interesting sort of tidbits, and then I'll stop gassing on this, is that, income drives life expectancy in most places. But the one demographic group in the U.S. that's an exception to that is Hispanics, who actually make less than whites, for instance, but actually live significantly longer. So, and that's because of the role of community and how that's called the Hispanic Paradox. And most people think it's the role of community and how Latinos tend to live their lives.
So Ken, one of the things that might be surprising to many people is that the concept of retirement and of the mid-60s being a time when you shift what your life looks like is relatively new. Can you talk about that?
Well, so it is. The retirement was a concept that was actually more or less invented in the middle of the last century, in part just because people didn't live that long. Life expectancy in the U.S. So the average retirement age, for instance, in the mid-century for American men was about 66, and life expectancy was about 62. So you sort of do the math on that. Fast forward today, when American men work roughly the same length of time, but live 16 years longer. And we've invented in the last 70 years the idea of retirement. And we've taken a rule invented by Chancellor Otto von Bismarck of Prussia of the retirement age of 65, which he invented in the 1880s. And we've continued to follow that to this day. So the idea of retirement at 65 still remains deeply embedded in sort of our notion of how we're supposed to live our lives, even as it makes less and less sense as we live longer and, as we are healthier until later ages and could work longer if we want to.
Was the average life expectancy above 65 at that time?
You mean back in 1880?
Yeah.
No, it was about 40. So this was a political gamesmanship story, and interesting to those of us who write about longevity. So Bismarck was about 70 himself, maybe 73, and the new chancellor, second, I guess, thought he was kind of an old and out of touch and wanted to get rid of him. Bismarck had been the Iron Chancellor, sort of created the modern Germany, but he was on the outs. And one of the things he was trying to do to sort of stay was to placate the German labor movement, which was finally pushing for some type of pension system, which didn't exist in all of Europe. So Bismarck was the first to create it, but he didn't really like workers and didn't really want to give them money. So even though life expectancy for Germans were about 40, he set the life expectancy payout rate at 65. So not a lot of people qualified for it. And then, 65 got sort of stuck in the collective consciousness, made no sense. And Roosevelt picked it up for Social Security and it's continued to really, even though it was just came up with gamesmanship by Chancellor Bismarck, it's now sort of universally considered the retirement age.
One of the things that I found shocking in the book, shocking might be a strong word, but you always hear about France. There's this sacrosanct notion of early retirement, and that is such a strong cultural, touchstone. And there's, anytime they try to lower the retirement age, there's massive or raise the retirement age rather, there's massive protest. But that's actually a very, very new part of their culture.
So all these things one of the things is many of the rules that we consider somehow to be moral principles are actually relatively recent inventions. So in the 60s, in France, if you look back at the history of work, retiring early was actually considered to be social death. The word it was described was, and it was only, as the socialists came to power in France in the 80s, when they started creating these early retirement rules, that the idea that this was sort of a inalienable right really developed in the cultural consciousness. And so when Macron wanted to raise the retirement age, but where it was in the 60s, it wasn't like he was changing things enormously, just wanted to ratchet it back to where in the 60s. People thought that was sort of an assault on their inherent inalienable right to retire. The countries that turn out to be successful in raising, every country in the world wants to raise the retirement age. There's economics at stake. The countries that are successful are those who aren't doing it because are doing it because people realize in those cultures that work is actually good for their social connection and good for their health, and it gives them purpose and meaning in the second half of life. So in Japan, which has not only the longest lived country in the world, but also country with the highest percentage of older workers, they don't have to raise the retirement age because people want to keep working longer, and they do.
So there's a conundrum here, and it's I guess not limited to this issue. And Dave, I'm sorry if I'm going off of the prepared questions here a little bit, but right, it just occurred to me, you're talking about like early retirement and withdrawing from the work world and into a different kind of life. From what you're saying is bad for us, right? It reduces lifespan, it reduces ability to live productively or enjoyably as we get older. But most people seem to want it, right? Or lots and lots of people seem to want it, as evidenced by the French protest, but as evidenced by most people who that if they could hang it up right now in their 50s, they would.
Yeah, so it's interesting. People as they age, tend to want to work longer. They sort of begin to understand. But look, there got to be 80 million Americans over the age of 65 by the middle of the century. That's a lot of people with a lot of different solutions. So I never say everyone has to work or no one should work past 65. It's going to be a lot of individual decision making. What I would say is a lot of people believe that they're supposed to retire at 60 or 65 and sort of built that into their own personal aspirations. Maybe that's right. Maybe that's wrong. The data on the impact of retiring is actually pretty clear. It's generally bad for your health. But I will say part of the reasons we want to retire is because we have this heliographic sense of what retirement is, sort of built up by the financial securities industry with advertising of us, how we're supposed to live. We're on this constant vacation. We're sitting at the beach. We're jet skiing around. That's not the retirement that most people get. The vast majority of American retirees, or at least the majority of American retirees, face financial precarity in retirement, and they face increasing loneliness, especially when you talk about working class or people without college degrees. Retirement is often really very tough. It's tough on them physically. It's tough on them mentally because of isolation. So everyone has to make their own decision. But I say is don't mythologize what retirement is for most people. And I know it's a downer, right? It's a downer to talk about it that way. But the upside is a lot of people get purpose. They find friends. They find social connection. They get the upside of working at least part-time.
Right. And it's not just where, you talk in the book and you focus a lot, particularly on Korea and Japan with this, on other forms of social engagement and busyness in later years, besides sort of paid employment.
Yeah. So it's really a menu of ways that you can think about getting next to people, right? So the research on social connection, on friendship, is that you have to have, it's mostly about proximity. 50 hours with someone to be a friend, 200 to be close friend. And the question is, where are you going to find that in retirement, especially as people sort of take that step off the work merry-go-round? Where are they going to find substitute relationships? Some find it through work, continue to work. Others find it through volunteering. In Korea, they really pushed the idea of lifelong learning, going to school with the constitutional right to everyone has to lifelong learning. And virtually every city in the country has set up these lifelong learning institutes that have classrooms within 5 or 10 minute walks of every neighborhood in the country. In Singapore, it's often about how do you keep generations together. And that's about housing policy and not having retirement communities, but having multi-generational apartment buildings and taking senior centers and turning them into centers for all age. There are lots and lots of ways that people are, even in the second half of life, get next to other people and build those social connections that report to our health and sense of purpose and value.
So these places where this has been designed in and is seeing success, have they also seen setbacks due to social media?
Let's start off with the social connection challenges we all face. The loneliness challenge faces all directly traceable to technology. Americans are not less friendly than we were 50 years ago, but first television and now phones and social media has intervened between people. It's essentially created a gap between human relationships. That is true everywhere as well, right? You go on a subway in Singapore or Seoul, people are face down in their phones just as they are here in DC or any big city. So it is a challenge. It's not like technology is not as widespread or even more widespread there. So they're fighting the same battles that we are. But what they've done, which we have not done, is they've made social connection. This sort of surprised me when I traveled to all these countries. Social health is at the center of a public health strategy. We just don't think about it. We think about how do you fight obesity, or how do you get people exercising, or how do you have a healthcare policy? All really important, but we don't have a social connection policy or plan like these other countries do. There's actually an enormous consequence. I think people know that there are other countries that are longer lived than us. I don't think they realize how much of all the economically developed countries in the world, we're by far the lowest in terms of life expectancy and by far the lowest in healthy life expectancy. And you look at healthy life expectancy, you can expect to live almost a decade longer in Japan than you can here. And that's just an enormous difference.
What are the current
we're
numbers?
Closer to, sort of life expectancy, US is about 79 and Japan is about 86. That's 7 years. But if you turn to healthy life expectancy, since we live about 2 years longer in poor health than people in Japan, that turns out to be 9 in terms of healthy life expectancy. We're a lot closer to Belarus and Panama and Jamaica than we are to Japan.
I was going to kind of pivot to generational attitudes, since our show is focused on Gen Xers who are just now coming to this part of our lives, if unwillingly to some degree.
Sure.
Do you think there's a...
Oh, it beats the hell out of the alternative.
That's right. That's right.
Do you think there's a difference between how we see things and what we're likely to experience, and how the boomers or previous generations have done it?
So that's an interesting question, Dave. I don't know the answer. I mean, I think each successive generation starts changing their thinking as they get closer to these sort of magic years of 60 and 65. I think the one thing that will be different is that I think boomers will change this notion of retirement. It's such a large generation. 10,000 people are turning 65 every day in just the United States. Just sort of let that sort of roll around your mind. Today, 10,000 people turn 65. I'm a late stage boomer. That's age 62.
We're happy to claim you as one of us if you'd like.
Thanks. My wife's in your generation. She won't claim me. I think boomers will have a different attitude about retirement and sort of their notion. I don't think they're quite ready to sort of wind down. So I think that they will start changing the culture of what the second half of life is going to be. And I think that will be to the advantage of Gen Xers.
So it's interesting because I think it seems anecdotally and certainly a widely held view among people our age that the boomers are sort of refusing to get out of the way. Right. And you certainly, I mean, you see it most clearly in politics, but I think you see it in a lot of other institutions as well, that, you know, the most senior leadership positions aren't flowing to people who are now in their 50s because people who are now in their 70s are refusing to step down.
Yeah. So that's sort of a generational warfare view that I sort of reject. I mean, the notion that there is a specific time that someone's supposed to step out of their way is a made-up rule. It may mean that the next generation doesn't come into power until their 60s or 70s, but we live much longer. There's no particular... It really reminds me of the notion that, sort of hopefully outdated notion that women should sort of take positions of power because men need it more. They need to be the earners. That's the kind of tired thinking that we have hopefully gotten past in terms of gender and need to get past in terms of age. Look,
you're a tired thinker. You need a nap.
No, it's this boomer who won't get out of the punditry way of us.
What does that mean? What does it mean to get out of the way?
Telling us that.
Right. That's right. That's right. I said, you can't have my podcast.
We're unclaiming you, Ken.
Yeah. Oh man, this has been a roller coaster ride. Yeah. I just think, and especially the politicians, look, if people think they should get out of the way, they can vote them out of the way. It's really one of these. I think this is a social media meme that we need to reject. People, boomers will eventually retire, and Gen Xers will take their place, and then the next generation will be complaining about you guys.
They already are. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
and the one after.
Yeah. It's lemmings in a line. We just have to. We shouldn't be so age conscious about these things.
So you touch on this some, but there are clearly some economic aspects and class aspects to this topic. It's one thing to say that someone who sits at a desk and answers emails and has meetings needs to keep working when they're 70, but something very different for an auto mechanic or a construction worker, right?
Yeah. So of course, I end up talking about work more than other things because it's interesting topic. People are interested in it. There are lots of different ways. I don't want to make this sort of social connection only about work, but let's talk about that for a second. Of course, it's different for people who have physical jobs, how long they can work. But it's also true. We should remember that it's not only economics that are tiered by class. I mean, obviously, people at the desk is going to make more money. But but they also have more social connection. So biggest demarcation in social connection is education. The more education you have, the more friends you're likely to have. In fact, if you look at the most recent data, if you have only a high school degree, I think about 16 or 20% of people with only a high school degree report having no friends. And they're like 1/6 is likely to report having 6 or more friends as people with college degrees. So sure, of course, it's harder to think about working if you've had a physical job. Think about the challenges of retirement for that group. You're largely, unless we think of a new system of work that includes them in their later years, we're largely consigning them to life of financial precarity because you have lived a long time with not many resources, haven't made much, and having no friends, a life of loneliness and poverty. That's a really ugly legacy for us to think about when we say, oh, yes, those people shouldn't have to work. The challenge,
it's like a Japanese movie.
Well,
I was going to say it actually could be the new subtitle for our podcast, Dave, but.
Both good ideas. So like in Japan, what they've done, where more people work longer, not that Japan is a famously competitive and stressful work culture, but when you hit sort of that retirement age, keep working, but you work in different ways. So they have something called the Silver Genzai Human Resources Center, which represents 1 million older working Japanese. Every one of them works part-time. There's more part-time work, there's more job sharing, there's more use of assistive technology. They create essentially a work culture that is intended to support people in the second half of life to work in a way that makes sense for them. So, we don't have that idea that there should be a whole system of work because we haven't needed it. In Japan, they just don't have enough workers. They need older workers. We're going to get there pretty soon too because of plunging birth rates and because we're taking out all the young immigrants. So companies are going to need old workers sooner rather than later.
So a final question for you, Ken, and thank you again for taking the time to be with us today. And thanks again for focusing on this issue, which is a really important one. You talk, a lot about society's extremely strong bias towards youth, and the fairly open age discrimination that I know from offline conversations, both Dave and I feel like we've experienced and lots of people our age feel like we've experienced. And there's probably some public policy answers to that, but it seems much more like a cultural issue that has to be addressed, just through the way that we live our lives. And what do you think we Gen Xers should be doing, and I don't include you in that group, to fight back and try and change that dynamic as, the oldest of us turned 60 this year. So
this is going to be actually a pretty critical issue to Gen Xers because even the younger ones are getting close to the age where they're going to start facing age discrimination in the workplace, right? ARP has reported that something like 75% of workers over 50 have either directly experienced or witnessed age discrimination in the workplace. If you lose your job, you need to find a new job when you're over 50, your odds of finding comparable work shrink dramatically. So this is going to be a core economic issue for millions of people in Gen X. My generation's actually already gone through it and sort of taken the sort of economic slings and arrows of age discrimination.
Do we all have to move to Japan? Is that what you're going to get at?
Well, Japan will need people, right? Japan and Korea have shrinking populations, which means that actually for the first time ever opened immigration. Let's all Japan. I'll throw out one last Japanese statistic. The median life expectancy for Japanese women is now 90. So if you're a Japanese woman who dies at 89, instead of saying, wow, that's a really long life, you say, oh, tough break. She died too early. I mean, it's a really very different sort of life expectancy profile in places like Japan than Chicago. So I think the first thing we have to start addressing is the notion that what we call the decline narrative, that, you hit 60 and you're basically beginning a long-term secular demise, roll down the hill till you die. And that's basically what the second half of life. We have to sort of start thinking of the years past 50 as years as productive, as meaningful as the years before. And that's a big cultural shift that I think people are starting to recognize, but haven't made in sufficient numbers. We have to really think about future success of society, because it does depend on, this society will not succeed if people past the age of 50 are not productive members of society. And that's not just economically, but that's socially, civilly, as caregivers. We have to view these people. We have to get rid of the cult of the youth. Young people are great. Kid is 18. I have people I work with who are 25. They're fantastic. But we all need people our ages to be important contributors to society. And I think that until we recognize that, it's going to be a struggle for Gen X to be able to succeed as they should. I feel like I talk about a lot of bad things. They're actually increasing models of people later and later in life who are productive. I use examples of people in their 90s, but they're 80s, 70s, 60s, 50s are doing phenomenal things that I think are model society. So Jane Goodall famously just died at 91 on a work trip, and we celebrate that. Mel Brooks at age 99 has just announced Spaceballs 2, which is to be delivered, which he's going to direct and star in when he's 101. I mean, that's chutzpah, right?
It is. I hope it's better than the second History of the World movie was. But yeah,
we can hope. I treasure Spaceballs, so I hope he doesn't ruin that legacy.
Fantastic. Well, Ken, it's been a real pleasure having you on, and lots of food for thought about how we think about our world. And look at that beautiful book. Thank you for holding that up.
Thank you, David.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ken. And we will be right back after this.
Today is my day off, and I'm taking care of the little princess here. Because the wife, she should have some time for herself. She should. That lady works hard. But I gotta hand it to her. She really knows how to take care of herself. I guess that's why she takes Geritol every day. She swears by it.
Geritol, more than double the iron you get from any ordinary supplement, and some very important vitamins. Take a look at who takes Geritol.
My wife. What'd I tell you?
Geritol, every day.
All right. So we've returned, and we're ready now for the final segment of the final stupid Gen X tricks, at least until the reunion episodes and the reboot and we
Bad
come back
sequel.
out of retirement and all the other stuff. But this next few minutes, as of right now, Dave, will be our legacy.
It's a lot of pressure.
A lot of pressure. So let's just play the Wormholes theme one last time. And then as our last wormhole, instead of the usual randomness, which is what the wormholes generally are, let's offer some parting thoughts about what we've done and whether we've learned anything over the last year of doing this thing, or just have something you've wanted to get off your chest all along. I do want to point out before we get to the wormholes, Dave, that the episode kind of conversation we just had with Ken about, the aging Gen Xers is something that I had wanted to do since the beginning of the podcast, and we did it, and we never did your pet idea of the Paperboys episode. So I won the podcast, I think, is what it comes down to.
How did that happen? Everyone was so up for it, but you. We had guests lined up. We had alternate guests. We could have done a panel on Paperboyness, Paper Girls. Shout out to Shannon, an outstanding paper girl in her time. Yes. Okay, you win. Well, I will. I guess I will start here, and first of all, inform our listeners of this episode that the answer to the question of how old Katharine Hepburn and Henry Fonda were in On Golden Pond was 73 and 75.
No. Okay. So they actually were those ages.
Yes. Well, I don't know if the character ages were those ages. That was how old the actors were
meant. Yeah, I mean, that's the age group that the characters were basically meant to be.
Yeah.
I don't know that they ever gave.
I kind of thought of them
numbers.
as in their 80s, especially because didn't she have the stammer and all that at that point? Yeah.
But didn't she always kind of have a stammer?
No, not if you look at her in her prime. Mm-mm.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, this has been great, and we've put a lot of work into it, and had some incredible friends and guests on, and I've laughed, I've cried, I've learned a lot. I feel like it's sort of like the end of an episode of Sesame Street. I learned some new letters, I learned some new ideas. There were pretty things to look at and enjoy about.
But no puppets. We have no. Well, you have your alien head, so yeah.
I do have my alien head. There's a lot of odd figures in my background, and I like them all. It does make me wonder a little bit about what's up with that, but I've got good aliens. I'll say that. And these are both the alien and the creature, the Black Lagoon, are key experiences from my youth as a junior Gen Xer. So it all comes full circle, I suppose. How about you?
Yeah, so I was thinking about, and one of the things that you and I have talked about from the outset of whether we should do this show or not, and that I've thought about all along is like, how real is this concept of Generation X, right? How real are any of these generational definitions and the notion that, everybody born between the years of 1965 and 1980 forms a cohesive group of some sort? And I think, on the one hand, over the course of the show, we've seen, that clearly not everything is a universal experience, right? And the thing we've talked about most probably has been music. And even you and I, of guys who are both within pretty close to each other in age and life experience, have some fairly different, and sensibility, have some fairly different takes on a lot of musical stuff. But that I do think there is one big thing that really does unite our generation that we talked about way back in one of the earliest episodes. And that's our experience of technology, right? And so that, like, even the youngest Gen Xers, the people who were born in 1985, are old enough to remember the old world, right? Before cell phones were ubiquitous and before the internet was a major thing. And even the oldest among us, the people who turned 60 this year, who were born in 1965, are young enough that they've lived most of their adult lives with those things and are fluent and conversant users of them. And I do think that living on that edge really does provide some real cohesiveness to this cohort of people, and has shaped who we are as people in a meaningful way. So there is a Gen X that is real, even if we don't all like the same TV shows or whatever, we've been through some stuff together.
It's true, but Elvis Costello still sucks.
Oh, if you are going to end this there's never going to be a reunion show.
Can't take it back. I love Elvis Costello. I love him.
I was going to try to get for this program, actually. My brother texted me this morning that he'd heard a recording of the cover of White Lines by Duran Duran that he was really floored by, and I was going to suggest that maybe this is a place where we can find peace over how badly Duran Duran generally sucks. But
no, because I don't like that cover.
Okay. I don't think I've ever heard it.
Yeah. I beg to differ with your brother, although I'll have to listen to it again now that it's come up. I think I gave it 40 seconds listen when it came out and was like, skip, which was, that's something that we experience, that our kids experience. the ability to skip a track without having to stand up, walk across the room, and lift the needle off a record player.
Yeah. That sucked. and then be able to put it down right in the right place and read the grooves correctly. And and
to skip the song you really don't want to listen to. Yeah. I think I'm glad that we created this document of a generation and of some of the things that we remember about it and our suburban indie white boy take on it, such as it is. Certainly not a universal view, but one that we also are not alone in. It's been fun, and I want to salute you for all the great writing and scripts that you made me look smarter than I am for. While I just take pot shots at your beloved musicians, which is really just low. And I'm glad that our friendship hasn't ended over these things.
Dave, it has really been a pleasure doing this with you. I feel like our friendship has probably deepened through this thing. And more to the point, we have educated the world about whatever we've educated the world about. I don't even know anymore.
Wormholes. Wormholes.
You have
miseducated the world about.
You have done great work on this. I look forward to finding other things to work on together, and I think that is going to do it for us. So give us one last heartfelt farewell.
Good night, sweet prince, and flights of angels sing you to sleep. What's that from? Is that like Shakespeare or something?
Hamlet.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. All right, good. Yeah.
Goodbye, everyone. Thanks. And also I want to say thank you for the collaborators outside, not only our guests, but our musical collaborators, our graphical collaborators, TJ McCoy, who did our fantastic logo and had other elements that I should have taken advantage of but didn't, and then Aman Abbasi for that fantastic theme, and Dan Clark and Supermassive Posse. All right, thank you, David.
All right. Thank you, Dave.
Until next time. Bye-bye.